She said I wasn't the right fit for her own wedding. All right, then.
They called me an embarrassment, so I decided to redefine the word.
My daughter looked me in the eye and said the words I never thought I'd hear. Dad, please don't come. It's not a good fit. Not this time. She said it with a smile, like it was a polite favor, like disinviting me from her wedding was just another calendar note. She didn't say it outright, but I could feel it in her tone, in the careful way she avoided the word. Poor. I wasn't good enough for the picture she wanted to paint. That was the last real conversation we had. Before we continue, if stories like this shock you, subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. My name is Frank Marino. I'm 58. I've lived in Columbus, Ohio my whole life. Raised my daughter just a few blocks from the Scioto Mile. Worked 31 years at the same Jeep plant. Clocked in before dawn, clocked out after dark. My boots outlasted half the machines. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't perfect. But I was there. Every school play, every scraped knee, every car breakdown, I put her through Ohio State without a single student loan in her name. Worked weekends, missed holidays, wore the same coat for 6 winters so she could have a new one each year. And now, suddenly, I wasn't welcome. Not because of anything I'd done, but because I didn't fit the aesthetic of her new life. She used that word, aesthetic, as if a father was an accessory, a color swatch that didn't match the rest of her curated palette. At first, I thought I'd misheard, but she doubled down, talked about optics, about how her fiancé's family came from a different background, and how she didn't want to invite awkwardness. Awkwardness. That's what I'd become. I didn't raise my voice, didn't plead, just nodded. I remember the drive home. My old '04 Ford Ranger shuddered each time I hit a pothole. The heater only worked on the passenger side, so I sat in a chill that felt deeper than cold air. The city lights blurred through the cracked windshield as I turned onto familiar streets. My neighborhood was quiet, houses with sagging porches and yellow porch lights, the same ones I'd passed for decades. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the one I'd repaired 3 times, once after a leg cracked, once after the veneer peeled, once when a water leak warped the wood. I ran my fingers over the scratches, each one a small history. On the wall hung a framed photo of her at age 5. She wore denim overalls I'd patched with my own hands when money was tight. Her hair was in crooked pigtails. She was laughing. Her smile back then was all teeth and trust. I stared until my eyes burned. Something inside me cracked. Not a loud break, but a quiet one, like an old beam finally giving way. But I didn't cry, didn't yell. Just sat there in the dim kitchen while the fridge hummed and the clock ticked. And I felt the weight of every overtime shift I'd ever worked. I didn't get angry. I got quiet. And I started planning. The weeks that followed passed like smoke. She sent a few texts, short, cold, polished. No warmth. No, Dad, are you okay? Just logistics about RSVPs, hotel blocks, and understanding if it's too much emotionally to attend. Too much emotionally. She wrote those words like she was doing me a kindness, like she hadn't already cut me out. I smiled when I read it, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a man makes when he's done hoping someone will see him. Because while she was sending save the dates to influencers and booking overpriced photographers, I was calling my credit union. See, what she didn't know, what no one really knew, was that I'd been quietly paying down my second mortgage for years. Back when the plant was doing well, I refinanced during COVID, when rates dropped, kept my expenses low, saved every extra shift I could take. And just a month earlier, the Jeep plant announced buyouts for older guys like me. I signed the papers without telling a soul. Took the retirement package, the savings, the little investments I'd chipped away at. When I added it up, it wasn't mansion money, but it was solid. solid enough to do one last thing on my own terms. I didn't touch the cash, not yet. I waited. I watched her life play out on Instagram. Champagne tastings, custom invitations, dress fittings with captions like manifesting elegance and born to be loved in luxury. She'd turned my sacrifices into the foundation for her rebrand, and still not one mention of her father. I wasn't going to crash her wedding, no. Too easy, too loud, too much drama for the guests to gossip over. I wanted something cleaner, something she couldn't Photoshop out of the picture. 2 weeks before the wedding, I walked into the Lincoln dealership in Dublin, just north of the city. It was a cold morning, frost on the sidewalks. I wore my usual boots, denim jacket, flannel. No suit, no briefcase, just a plain folder tucked under my arm, stuffed with withdrawal slips and a cashier's check. The showroom smelled like new leather and fresh coffee. A salesman in a tailored suit glanced at me, smiled politely, and steered me toward the used section with rehearsed charm. "Looking for something affordable?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just laid the folder on his desk. The top slip slid out, a check with more zeros than he expected. He blinked. His smile cracked. "Sir, this is a full?" he stammered. I nodded once. No need for words. Something shifted in the room. The other salespeople glanced over. Someone fetched coffee for me without asking. Suddenly I wasn't just a tired plant worker in old boots. I was a man ready to buy top trim with cash. That afternoon I drove home in a midnight black Lincoln Navigator. Black Label edition. Pearl leather seats. Every bell and whistle. Even the sound of the door closing was solid. Quiet but heavy, like respect. Before I parked, I ran my hand across the steering wheel. Real leather. Smooth. For a moment I felt, not rich exactly, but seen. Validated. The custom license plate I'd ordered weeks ago was ready. Paid in full. I tucked the car into my garage like a secret and threw an old tarp over it. Didn't drive it once until the big day. My Ranger carried me to the grocery store and back, same as always. I wanted no one to know. The morning of the wedding came bright and sharp. Sunlight poured across the city like gold. I woke early, shaved slow, put on my best jacket, the one I'd worn to her college graduation, checked the mirror twice, then locked the door behind me. When I pulled the tarp off the Navigator, the black paint caught the light like still water. I opened the door and the new car scent hit me. Rich, warm, clean. I sat there for a second, hands on the wheel, breathing steady. No anger, no sadness, just quiet resolve. The drive downtown felt like a small movie of its own. Every red light reflected off the hood. People turned to look as I rolled past the old neighborhoods, the familiar corners where I'd once walked her to school. The city felt both the same and utterly new. I reached the venue, a glass-walled banquet hall she'd shown off online. Expensive, modern, the kind of place where champagne never stops flowing. I parked across the street, angled just right, so the license plate gleamed when the sun shifted. Guests poured in, men in tailored suits, women in silk dresses. Laughter floated across the pavement. Someone popped a champagne cork, the sound crisp in the cold air. Then the doors opened, and there she was, my daughter, white dress trailing behind her like smoke, veil soft as lace mist. Her arm looped through her groom's. She looked every bit the fairy tale bride she'd dreamed of becoming, until her eyes found me. For a split second, her face froze. Confusion, then recognition, then something else. Panic, maybe shame. I stepped out slowly, closed the door with a muted thud, stood beside the Navigator without a word. The sun caught my license plate. Paid in full. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bridesmaids whispered behind manicured hands. The groom's parents squinted. The photographer raised a camera, then hesitated. Her perfect aesthetic cracked. Right there on the pavement. She let go of her groom's arm and walked toward me, alone. "Dad," her voice wavered. "Is that... It's mine. You bought a Lincoln?" Paid in full, I said, calm as stone. No loans. Got the papers right here if you need proof. She blinked, caught between disbelief and the dawning realization that the man she'd dismissed wasn't small, wasn't weak, wasn't an embarrassment. I could almost see the narrative she'd built collapsing in real time. That her dad was too modest, too plain, too wrong for her new life, that he'd fade quietly into the background. I reached into the glove box, pulled out the thick dealership receipt, and handed it to her. My hand was steady. Hers wasn't. She looked at the paper, then back at me, eyes glassy but not with joy. I didn't say another word, just turned, stepped back into the Navigator, and pulled away, slow enough that every pair of eyes followed, slow enough for the weight of the moment to settle. Behind me, silence, then whispers, then nothing. The day after I drove away from her wedding, I sat alone at the kitchen table again. Same chair, same spot, but something had shifted. Not outside, not even in her. Inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I was awake. But let's go back, because the real betrayal didn't start with that wedding invite that never came. That was just the final cut. The bleeding started long before. Months earlier, when she got engaged, I'd been the first person she called. Her voice trembled with a mixture of shock and joy. "Dad, I said yes," she squealed through the phone. I remember how the wrench I was holding almost slipped from my hand and clanged against the concrete floor of the garage. My face broke into the widest grin I'd worn in years. I felt like my chest might burst with pride. "Sweetheart," I said, laughing, That's amazing." She giggled, breathless. "I know. I can't believe it either." I told her I was proud, told her she deserved happiness. I even said, without hesitation, that I'd help pay for the reception. I wasn't rolling in money, but I could chip in $5,000, maybe more if I rearranged some things. I wanted her day to shine. There was a pause, barely a second, but long enough for me to hear the weight in it, long enough to feel the subtle shift, the sound of someone calculating behind a polite smile. Then she said, "Oh, Dad, that's really sweet. We'll see." That "we'll see" stung more than it should have, but I pushed it away, told myself I was imagining things, that maybe she was just overwhelmed, that planning a wedding was stressful. I didn't want to believe my little girl could be measuring my worth. At first, the distance came disguised as practicality. I wasn't asked to walk her down the aisle, wasn't invited to the tasting. When I asked about her dress, I expected excitement, details, maybe a photo of fabric or lace. Instead, she said, "Oh, it's kind of a surprise thing with Mom and his family. They're all really into fashion." Into fashion. The way she said it was casual, almost flippant. But it told me everything. My opinion wasn't a factor. My presence didn't belong in the picture they were curating. I started noticing changes when she was with her fiancé's people. Words polished, accents softened, her warm Ohio edges sanded down into something sleeker. She laughed at jokes she never would have found funny before. Jokes about blue-collar quirks, about Midwestern dads with their trucks. I'd hear her voice dip into this polite, airy tone that didn't belong to the kid who once wore overalls with mismatched socks. One afternoon, she stopped by with him. I'd swept the porch, brewed a fresh pot of sweet tea, the kind she grew up drinking on sticky summer evenings. They walked in hand, his loafers spotless, his shirt crisp and expensive-looking. I offered sweet tea. He smiled politely. "Oh, thanks, but do you have kombucha?" Kombucha? I didn't even know how to pronounce it. I laughed awkwardly, tried to play it off. "Can't say I keep that around." She gave me a look. That half-laugh, half-apology expression people give when they're embarrassed by someone. A quick, silent message. Sorry, Dad. You're not this." That look stayed with me longer than anything said that day. After they left, I stood at the window and watched their white BMW roll down the gravel driveway. Dust kicked up and curled into the cold air. She didn't wave. She was scrolling on her phone, already somewhere else in her mind. A few days later, Instagram told me more than she did. A post of her fiancé's family gathered around a glass table, sipping wine under warm lighting. Everyone polished, smiling like a magazine ad. The caption read, "Grateful for family who understands elegance, grace, and growth." Family. Not a single word about me, not a tag, not a mention, just invisible. That same afternoon, my inbox pinged. It was from her. A spreadsheet. Guest count. Venue layout. Color-coded seating chart. I scrolled through every column, every tiny colored box. My name wasn't there. Not in blue, not in red, not anywhere. For a second I thought maybe it was an oversight. Maybe there was another sheet. I called. No answer, so I left a message, trying to sound casual. "Hey kiddo, just checking if this is the right version. Looks like I'm not seeing my name. Maybe there's another tab." Nothing. The next day, a text. Short, detached. "Hey Dad, things are kind of complicated right now. I'll explain soon." She never did. That's when I started checking my bank accounts. Not because I planned to spend, but because I needed to remind myself of facts, of what I'd done for her. 3 years back, she'd asked me to co-sign a lease during grad school. Said she just needed a little help to get started. Promised she'd handle the payments, and she did. For a while. Then the letters came. Overdraft notices. Tiny ones first. Then larger. Late payment alerts. Calls from collections. Calls to me, not her. When I finally got through to her, I asked why she hadn't said anything. "It just slipped my mind," she said. Slipped. Thousands of dollars. And it just slipped. I didn't yell, didn't scold. I simply paid it. Again. Covered the balance to protect her credit. Because that's what a father does. She never even said thank you. That same winter, my water heater gave out. It cost $1,200 to replace. She didn't know that, of course. She was busy posting stories from wine tastings, engagement photo shoots, bridal showers. I wasn't angry about the heater. It just reminded me how little she saw of my life anymore. But I still watched every story, every post, not to punish myself, not to feel jealous. I watched to stay awake, to remember what I was up against, the world she'd chosen over me. Sometimes it hurt enough that I'd shut my phone and just sit in the dark kitchen for a while, the hum of the fridge, the quiet, my own breathing. One night, I ran to the supermarket for eggs and instant coffee. I wore my old brown jacket, the one with a stitched elbow patch from when I tore it on the garage door. I was standing by the dairy cooler when they walked in, her and him, laughing, effortless. She looked lit up, glowing with a life that seemed untouched by the man stocking up on cheap butter. Then she spotted me. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, something flickered in her expression. Surprise? Guilt? It vanished so fast I couldn't tell. She forced a tight smile, small and brittle. Turned to him, whispered something. They turned and left. Just like that. No hello, no wave. They didn't even check out. That's when it sank in deep. This wasn't about elegance or growth. It was shame. She was ashamed of me. After that, I stopped reaching out, not from anger, from clarity. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's acceptance. I also started keeping records. Quietly, methodically. I pulled out old file boxes, receipts, tuition slips, pediatric bills, little yellow carbon copies from the used Toyota Corolla I bought her when she was 16. I built my own spreadsheet. Every dime I could track. By the end, the total sat on the screen, cold and undeniable. 163,422. That's what I had poured into her life beyond food and shelter. Just the extras. Just the gifts she once called special treats. I didn't plan to send it to her. It wasn't a weapon. It was proof. For me. A reminder that I wasn't crazy. That I hadn't been a bad father. That the world she now thrived in stood on my shoulders. The week of the wedding, I swung by her mother's house. My ex and I ended long ago, but civilly. We'd built separate lives without bitterness. She answered the door with a glass of white wine in hand, dressed sharp but casual. She looked surprised. "Oh," she said, "didn't expect you." I smiled lightly. "Just dropping something off. Wanted to wish our daughter well." She sighed, leaned against the doorframe. "She's nervous," she said. "Wants everything perfect." I nodded. "Yeah, I figured." Then she added, almost cautiously, "She said you might do something dramatic." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "I don't know. Show up, 'cause a scene." I let the words hang there for a moment. I realized then that somewhere along the line I'd been painted as the problem. The bitter, broke old man who couldn't let go. The potential embarrassment. I didn't argue. Didn't defend. Myself. Just handed over an envelope. Inside was the car title for the Navigator, proof that I had built something solid, on my own terms. "If she asks," I said simply, "give her this." Her mother opened her mouth to ask, but I was already turning back to my truck. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was patient. And patience. Patience is what makes a reckoning last. The closer the wedding got, the more the mask slipped. It started with a phone call from an old neighbor. "Frank," he said carefully, voice low like he wasn't sure if he should even tell me, "You okay?" I told him I was fine. My tone probably sounded stronger than I felt. He hesitated, then sighed. "Look, I was at the bridal shop downtown the other day, just picking something up for my wife, and I overheard your girl talking. Said something about hoping you don't show up in that rusty truck. Said it would, you know, mess up the photos. Embarrassing, she called it." For a second I couldn't answer. The words didn't cut like a knife. They pressed like a slow weight on my chest. Not because of the insult itself, but because of how casually it had been delivered. Like my entire life, decades of work and sacrifice had boiled down to a bad backdrop for her curated story. I cleared my throat. "Thanks for telling me," I said quietly. Then I hung up. Sat in the dark living room, lights off, just listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The walls held the memories of 1,000 mornings and nights. Her crayon drawings still faintly stained the old paneling near the hallway. It was the first time I realized this wasn't about taste or image. This was about a lie she was protecting, the polished myth that she had built herself from nothing. And I, the man who had spent decades lifting her, was inconvenient proof. A few days later, a message buzzed my phone. It was from one of her cousins. Just a screenshot. No greeting, no commentary. It was a group chat. Bridesmaids and close friends. At the top, my daughter's words. "Dad's nice, but, he doesn't understand this world. We're trying to keep the vibe classy and modern. Mom's handling the family invites." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Classy and modern. 30 years on a factory floor. 2 decades of double shifts. A house held together with calloused hands. Now I was reduced to a branding problem. I didn't respond, didn't thank the cousin or ask for details. I just saved the screenshot, tucked it into a folder on my laptop labeled Receipts. That folder became my quiet weapon. A record not for revenge, but to keep me steady when doubt crept in. Night was the hardest. Driving home after overtime, headlights bouncing off empty Ohio fields. That's when the old memories slipped in like ghosts. I'd think about the time she was 12 and fell from the oak tree in our yard. Broke her wrist. There'd been so much blood from a cut on her arm that my shirt soaked through while I carried her into the ER. Insurance barely touched the bill. I worked 4 extra weekends to cover what was left, or the winter in her freshman year of college. The night she called sobbing because her Corolla had died in a snowy parking lot. I drove 3 hours through sleet, bare hands on a frozen wrench as I swapped her battery. Then I drove back through the night so I could punch the time clock at 5 a.m. She used to wrap her arms around me after those rescues. "You're my hero, Dad," she'd whisper. Now I was a liability. The humiliation didn't come in big scenes. It was small, sharp, and quiet. One afternoon at the grocery store, I ran into her old English teacher. The woman smiled wide. Frank, you must be excited about the wedding. I felt my throat tighten. I'm not invited, I said carefully. Her face changed in an instant. Pity, disbelief, awkwardness, all tangled together. She reached out as if to touch my arm, then stopped. I mumbled something about needing milk and walked away, leaving a half-full cart behind. Another day at the hardware store, a kid who'd gone to school with her rang me up. He asked if I'd be walking her down the aisle. I forced a smile. No, I said softly. She wants something different. The kid's smile faltered. He handed me my change like it was fragile. I drove home in silence both times. That silence hardened, became a forge. Life has a strange way of turning once you stop expecting anything. Late spring, an envelope from the bank arrived. I almost tossed it with the junk mail. Good thing I didn't. It was about the small rental property I co-owned with my brother. A tired brick duplex we'd scraped together enough to buy years ago. The city wanted the land for redevelopment. They were buying us out. The payout was more than I'd ever dreamed it would be. Enough to shift my position overnight. I called my brother. He was giddy, already planning a Florida trip with his cut. "What about you, Frank?" he asked. "Finally going to treat yourself?" "Yeah," I said, staring at the letter. Something like that. That night, I opened the Lincoln website, started building a dream I'd never let myself have. Black label navigator, massaging seats, panoramic roof, full tech package, midnight paint that looked like deep water at night. Every click felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Not to flaunt, not to prove something to her, just to stop letting anyone write me small. At first, I didn't plan to show up at all. I thought I'd buy it, know I could, and hold my dignity quietly while she had her curated life. But then came the rehearsal dinner. I wasn't invited, of course, but friends talk, and social media leaks everything. A buddy texted me a video that was already bouncing around Instagram stories. Her fiancé stood, glass raised high, voice booming, "Here's to marrying into elegance, and to new families who get it." Someone off camera joked, "No rusty trucks allowed." Laughter erupted, not polite chuckles. Big, rolling, careless laughter. And there she was, my daughter, laughing too. Full-throated, free, not a trace of discomfort. I watched the clip again, and again. My hands trembled on the phone. That night, I made my decision. I wasn't going to crash the wedding screaming. I wasn't going to cry or plead. I was going to arrive in silence and let the truth arrive with me. The next days felt like a quiet mission. I detailed the navigator until the black paint gleamed like obsidian, conditioned the leather until the cabin smelled like promise, checked every mirror, every panel. I printed the bill of sale and title, added them to a crisp folder along with the receipts of my life, tuition payments, lease cosigns, loan payoffs. Not to hand over, just to know, deep in my bones, that I was not small. I bought a new suit, not flashy, dark gray, clean lines, enough to feel like I belonged anywhere. The night before, I ironed my shirt until the creases looked sharp enough to cut glass, and I made myself a promise. No yelling, no tears, just presence. The venue was every bit as polished as Instagram promised. Glass walls catching the late morning sun, white roses in perfect rows, valet drivers in black vests whisking away imported cars. I didn't hand over my keys. I parked myself, front and center. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was arriving, not sneaking in through a service door. Guests began streaming in. Music floated from hidden speakers. I stayed in the driver's seat, engine low, observing. Some glanced at the navigator, at me. A few nodded with quiet respect. Others squinted, trying to place the man stepping out of such a machine. Then came the bridal party. I could feel the air change before I even saw her. Gasps, whispers, a ripple. The groom's father nudged someone, pointed toward my car. And then she appeared. My daughter, radiant, luminous in a way that only brides can be. But when her eyes found me, something cracked. She froze mid-step, veil quivering. I didn't move, didn't wave, didn't smile. I simply stood there, one hand resting on the polished hood. Sunlight glinted across the chrome emblem. The license plate caught the crowd's eye. Paid in full. The whispers hushed into silence. She stepped toward me slowly, almost against her will. Veil trembled in the breeze. "Dad," she whispered, voice barely there. "You came." "I came," I said evenly. "I always come." Her groom glanced between us, confused, trying to decode the moment. His parents stiffened, Wealth doing math. Someone murmured behind me, "Is that his?" She swallowed. "Did you—" "Bought it last week," I said. "Cash." Her eyes darted to the car, then to the gathered crowd. I saw 1,000 unspoken stories collapse at once. The careful narrative that I was small, unworthy, irrelevant. I didn't open the folder, didn't need to. The truth was standing there, steel and silence. Everything she'd hidden, every way she'd tried to shrink me, had just been shattered under the morning sun. I didn't stay long, didn't need to. I gave her one last look, steady, not cruel. Then I slid into the Navigator. The cabin embraced me in quiet luxury. The engine purred. In the rear view I saw her step back toward the perfect facade, cheeks flushed with something between shock and shame. And I drove away, slow, certain. Every eye followed until I turned the corner and disappeared. I didn't hear from her for 3 full days after the wedding. No call, no text. But I knew she'd seen me, and I knew, deep in her heart, she understood exactly what I'd done. She'd spent months curating a life that erased me, and in one silent moment, I made myself unforgettable. But I wasn't finished. See, the wedding was just the beginning. The public facade was one thing, but the real damage, that would unfold slowly, one crack at a time. The first call came from her fiancé's mother. I didn't even know she had my number. The phone rang mid-morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee. The Navigator parked outside like a secret weapon idling in the sun. "Frank," she said, her voice high and brittle. "This is Lorraine, Thomas's mom." I stayed quiet for a second, long enough for the pause to feel heavy. "Yes," I finally said. She cleared her throat. We didn't realize. I mean, we assumed—" "You assumed I was poor," I said flatly. No, not at all. We thought you were a little more humble." I almost laughed. The sound came out like a short exhale through my nose. "I am humble," I said, "but I'm not invisible." There was a long pause. I could hear her swallow. Then she said softly, almost forced, "It was a beautiful car." I didn't respond. I let the silence stay. She mumbled something about impressions and perceptions, her voice shrinking with every word. Then she hung up. I sat back in my chair, staring out the window at slow-moving clouds over the Scioto Mile. The same view I'd stared at for years, but it felt different now, like the air itself finally remembered me. The next call came from my daughter. 2 days later, no small talk, no apology, just, "I saw you." "I know," I replied. "You looked different." "I am." Silence stretched across the line, long enough that I could hear her breathing, uneven, unsure. Then she said, "People are talking." I waited. "Thomas's family is asking questions," she continued quietly. They assumed you weren't in the picture because you weren't." "I was always in the picture," I said. "You just cropped me out." I heard her breath hitch, a tiny sound, almost like she'd been punched in the stomach. "Then why'd you do it?" The question hung there, like smoke in a cold room. "I didn't do it to you," I said, voice steady. "I did it for me." I could almost hear her trying to form words and failing. Then the line went quiet. That night I pulled out the folder again, the one with all the receipts, all the proof. I didn't flip through it to plan my next move. I flipped through it to remind myself. The sacrifices were real. The payments were made. The years of skipped meals, late shifts, sleepless nights, they had weight. They weren't invisible, and now neither was I. Later that week, I drove the Navigator into town, not to show off, not to parade, just errands, grocery store, post office, bank. But people noticed. Small town memory is long, and word travels faster than any wedding invitation. At the gas station, a clerk I'd known since she was a kid leaned out of the booth. Braces gone now, but I still remembered them. She smiled wide. "That's yours?" I nodded. She grinned. "Your daughter must be proud." I didn't answer, just tapped the gas and rolled away slow. The fallout began like a drip in a quiet house. Whispers first, then stories passed secondhand. One of her bridesmaids told a mutual friend that the groom's family had reassessed things. Apparently, they'd assumed I was a deadbeat, that my daughter had overcome a rough background. But now they knew better, because the truth was leaking out. She hadn't overcome me. She'd stood on me, and now that truth was seeping through the cracks in the perfect image. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. Inside, an embossed invitation to a post-wedding family dinner. The handwriting on the envelope was hers. No apology, no message, just the date, time, and location. I didn't RSVP, but I went. Not for her. For me. The dinner was at a country club, the kind of place with manicured hedges and valets who glance at your car before deciding how to treat you. I pulled up and parked the Navigator right at the front entrance. Didn't hand the keys to anyone. Didn't want to. The car's black paint caught the last of the evening sun, gleaming like polished stone. People arriving behind me slowed, eyes tracking the plate, paid in fuel. I walked in slow, shoulders square, nodding to the hostess who tried to mask her curiosity. She led me to the private dining room. Every head turned when I stepped through the doorway. Her new in-laws, friends, cousins, and my daughter, standing at the far end of a long white linen table. "Dad," she said, voice tight. I nodded once. "Hello?" Her smile flickered. Too quick. Too forced. "I'm glad you came." I pulled out the empty chair they'd clearly saved for me and sat down without a word. The meal moved in uneasy waves. Forks clinking on china. Stilted small talk. Laughter that never quite found its footing. At one point, Thomas, the groom, raised his glass, trying to break the tension. "To new beginnings," he said brightly, then turning toward me with a rehearsed smile. "And to surprises." I met his eyes. "Surprises fade," I said calmly. "Receipts don't." The room fell silent. You could hear the silverware settle. Then I reached down, lifted the folder from beside my chair, and slid it across the table to my daughter. She hesitated, hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside, proof of every tuition check, photos of her first car, the lease agreement, credit card payoff notices, and sitting on top like a quiet verdict, the paid-in-full title to the Lincoln. No speech, no anger, just facts. She didn't speak, didn't move. Her groom's parents leaned in, scanning the pages. I watched the confusion on their faces shift to discomfort, then something deeper. Shame. I stood. "I'm not here for approval," I said, voice even. "I'm here to correct the narrative." Then I turned and walked out. Outside, the sun was dipping below the trees. Golden hours spilled across the parking lot, bathing the Navigator in honeyed light. Its chrome trim gleamed like a quiet exclamation point. I slid behind the wheel. The cabin smelled like clean leather and cool air. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. As I pulled away, I glanced through the wide glass windows of the dining room. My daughter was still seated, folder open, staring down at the weight of truth spread before her. I didn't look back again. Didn't need to. The damage was done, not by yelling, not by revenge, but by facts. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A single text. "Alyssa, I'm sorry." No punctuation, no flourish. But it was the first honest sentence she'd sent me in over a year. I didn't hear from Alyssa for almost 2 months after the certified folder landed in her lap. Not a word, not a text, not a birthday call. The silence was different this time. Not dismissive, not cruel. Just quiet. She was sitting with it, with all of it. I pictured her at night, maybe when Thomas was asleep, opening the folder again, running her fingertips across the tuition receipts, pausing over the maintenance log from her old Corolla, seeing the co-signed lease with my name and hers side by side, realizing every step she'd taken toward that polished new life had been laid on a foundation she didn't build alone. But I didn't expect her to call. I wasn't waiting for forgiveness. I'd already given that to myself. The navigator sat in the driveway most days, hood catching the sunlight like quiet armor. I didn't flaunt it. Didn't take it to barbecues or church or anywhere to make a point. It wasn't a trophy. It was proof. A monument I could touch on the days when invisibility crept back in. The first few weeks after the dinner, I noticed how people looked at me differently. Not gawking, not gossiping, just reconsidering. Men who used to nod politely now stopped to ask how I was doing. Younger guys at the hardware store asked what kind of engine it had. Neighbors asked about refinancing, about saving, about the long game. It was subtle but steady, my name beginning to mean something other than pity. One Saturday I drove to a quiet park on the edge of town, a place where Alyssa and I used to go when she was little. She'd toss crumbs to ducks while I drank cheap coffee from a thermos. The bench was still there, old but solid, like me. I sat and watched the pond, listened to wind skim across the water, thought about all the mile markers behind us. Birthdays, scraped knees, first day of college. Thought about the nights I worked through Christmas so she wouldn't feel small, and how somewhere along the way I let myself believe I was small anyway. Not anymore. It was a Thursday morning when the knock came, soft, hesitant, enough to pull me from the newspaper. I opened the door. She was standing there, hair pulled back, no makeup, a canvas tote hanging from one shoulder. Eyes rimmed red, not fresh tears, but the kind that come after weeks of holding them back. "Hi, Dad," I nodded once. "Hey." She glanced past me into the hallway she used to sprint down in socks. "I wasn't sure you'd be here." "I'm always here." Something in her face crumpled at that. She drew a long breath. "I was wrong?" Then quieter. "I was so wrong." She stepped inside without asking. I didn't stop her. We sat at the kitchen table. Same one from her childhood. Legs still wobble if you lean too hard left. She placed her palms flat on the scarred wood. "I let them shape how I saw you," she said slowly. "They talked about style, image, money, and I started thinking you were less." I stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't personal, that it was just about the vibe, the event, the look of it all. But that was a lie. Her eyes found mine. "You were never less. I just made you less in my head, because it made me feel more." I nodded. "That's an old trick," I said gently. "One I know too well." She swallowed hard. "I told Thomas I needed space. Time to think. We're not in a good place." I didn't jump in. Didn't offer comfort she hadn't asked for. She reached into her tote and pulled out the folder. Same one I'd left on the country club table. Now worn, corners bent, pages creased. "I read everything," she said. "Twice." I waited. I didn't know about the hospital bills, or the extra shifts, or how much you covered after college. I just assumed. She blinked fast. "You never made me feel like I owed you anything. And maybe that's why I forgot." I leaned back. "I didn't do any of it for credit." "I know." Her voice broke to a whisper. "That's what makes it worse." Silence sat between us like a third chair. After a while, she asked, soft, "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Why the car?" I almost smiled. "Because it speaks a language. You'd been taught to understand." Her brows knit. "What do you mean?" I gestured toward the folder. "All that, tuition checks, utility bills, sacrifices, those didn't count in your world anymore, right? But a new luxury car, that stopped you." Her eyes filled. "I hate that that's true." "I don't," I said. "I just used it to buy my seat back at the table." She shook her head. "You never lost your seat." "I did," I said softly. "You just didn't notice the empty chair." Her face crumpled, but she held the tears back. We sat with the truth. No melodrama, just the quiet gravity of years. Eventually she stood. I should go? I walked her to the door. She turned on the porch, gripping the tote strap. I want to fix this. Start by telling the truth, I said. To yourself, and to the people who think you grew without roots. She nodded. Then, almost shyly, the Navigator, it's beautiful. I chuckled. It's just a car. No, she said softly. It's a message. She stepped down the stairs, then paused and looked back. Thank you for everything, even now. And then she walked to her modest silver sedan and drove off. A few days later, I took the Navigator out on an aimless drive. No destination, just road and engine and sky. The sun dropped low, gilding the fields outside Columbus. Barns and silos rolled by like old friends. The leather seat cradled me in quiet power. I thought about her, about the roads we'd both chosen, messy, full of wrong turns, about how love can survive even when respect goes missing. I didn't know what the future would look like for us. Didn't know if we'd ever be what we were, but I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. She sees me now, and that is enough. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.